Hello and welcome to the Cubicle Liberation podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how we close big SEO client deals. So, Fletch, have you closed big client SEO deals in the past?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And I'll be able to talk about a little bit of maybe something different than a lot of strict SEOs do. One of these deals actually included some other elements of digital marketing, and so what I think most people who are kind of in our little realm of SEO, monthly SEO deals, I think they would consider them to be large. So yeah, it's gonna be fun talking about.
And I have experience with this. This is what I shoot for in general. I have a 6,500 a month recurring one that I did recently, and I guess about 9 months ago, 8-9 months ago, that I've been able to do these in the past. So I do feel like, to some degree, I've cracked the code on how to do this. Now, Fletch brought up a really good point about like comparing big deals to small deals. And it's not just about, as you can see here, like, is it harder to close big deals versus small deals? And then also there's kind of like different benefits to each one and hidden costs. So Fletch, in your mind, do you think it's harder for you to close a big deal versus a small deal?
I'm not sure it's harder, but more goes into it. From my perspective and my experience, I guess my perspective is based on my experience. There are two that I think are kind of noteworthy. They were, one was just under 10K a month. One was just over 10K per month. And each of them included like months and months of payment at the inception, right? So it was, one of them was a check that came into our agency that was over $100,000. The other one was in right around that range as well, 98, I think, or something like that. And so one of those deals included a process where they contacted me, I got back in touch with them, and then I was like, I don't really know how to navigate this, right? Everything I'd done up to that point had been like maybe $1,500 deals per month. They were kind of standard. This was a process that included a board of directors, that included, vice president of sales, which I'm like, vice president or president? Like, I didn't know how corporate hierarchy really went. I've never really worked in the corporate world that much. I didn't understand kind of how things were going. And so I was kind of just like, okay, well, I'm going to jump in the pool and I think I know how to swim. And so let's just kind of explore this, right? I didn't have a great framework, but I'd done consulting a lot, right? And I'd consulted with companies. And so I was familiar and comfortable with talking about something that I was very, very capable of with a company who did not really have anybody that was capable of the stuff that I was going to be doing for them. So it's I approached it as kind of like a consultative sale, like kind of situation. And so that deal kind of came to me through a referral. It was not because I was ranked number one. It was a referral from someone else that had come across me and the training that I'd put together. And they had been asked, they were in some kind of circle, I guess, by someone in the company. They said that who was saying, we need to get more traffic from the internet. And this guy said, well, you ought to talk to Fletch, right? And so then that's kind of how that process came about. The other one was almost exactly the same way. It was because I had been doing stuff on the internet and had putting, marketing out there about training, about search engine optimization, about how important and impactful organic traffic is to a business, in addition to just kind of the vote of confidence from being number one in Google. Like that cannot be underestimated. And so that element, in addition to the traffic, was really key in helping me help them see what we could do for them as a company. And so, the other one wound up being a referral as well that came through a different contractor.
So the amount of work, let me see if I understand this correctly. The amount of work compared to, let's say, your 1,500 a month deals was definitely more. It was definitely more work.
It was more work, and it was a longer sales cycle.
Yep.
So the sales cycle with the first one I was kind of talking about, from the first time we contacted each other until the deal was closed was probably more than 2 months.
So here's how I look at this. If you compare one deal to one deal, then it is like you compare a 1,500 a month deal to a 10,000 a month deal. I'd say that sometimes they can be about the same, but it up to a point. So it's probably not 10,000 a month. So I've closed 4,000 a month deals that took just as much work or less work than a 1,500 a month deal. But I do think that there does come a point at which, especially with bigger companies that can afford 10,000 a month or more, the sales cycle I would expect to be longer and to be more work in convincing them of that, which kind of makes sense. But also, if you think about, well, how much work is it to close, let's say 5 or 6 or 7 1,500 a month deals versus one 10,000 a month deal? If you compare money to money, I would say that it's possible that the bigger one is actually less work overall if you compare money to money.
I think there might be kind of a sweet spot depending on the person and the organization.
Yeah, and that's what I found for me, my business. I prefer, I was actually I'm glad that you brought that up. I don't want businesses that are really like too small because they can't like afford marketing. But also with the bigger businesses, the sales cycle is so long, and that it makes it a lot harder to.
It's harder on us as a small company. Like there's investment. Like on that first deal for me, like there was probably 20 man hours that went into just getting through the meetings and getting through the presentations. And because it was outside of what my norm was, that was all custom. It's not like I had the go-to proposal and just ran it by them and needed to talk to the right people. There was just a lot in it. And so, I think there's something there as well, which is like, hey, if it's just a bigger deal, but it's the same thing, like it's just a bigger, similar thing to what you always do. If it's just SEO, well, then, that may not eat up the amount of resources that one of these deals did for me.
Yeah. And in a lot of cases, that's true for me. Even for like $4,000 or $5,000 a month deals, it's not really that much more. The 6,500 a month, there was a little bit more. The sales cycle was a little bit more work and a little bit longer. I kind of had a lesser version of what Fletch talked about. There were three guys that were kind of in charge running of this specific company. It was a successful company, and and normally I don't go and meet with people. This was before COVID, but normally I don't go meet with people unless I really think that they're going to be a really good customer. So I drove out to meet them because I sensed that it was a potentially big client. And after that meeting, they signed up. And so this was additional to my normal sales process. But this isn't completely out of the ordinary. Every once in a while, I will meet somebody because it does make sense to me that they kind of want to see you face to face, and it's a trust building factor, and they want to feel that you're real. And it just helps. There's a lot of communication is in body language, and even with a Zoom call, you can't get all of that. So you can't see all the ways in which people can respond. And so you just kind of want to look in the whites of people's eyes. And I get that. And so I haven't met them since. Okay. And they've been paying me $6,500 a month. The relationship is really good. They're doing really well. And so I also kind of want to point out something that there's kind of some additional benefits of big versus small. I think in some businesses, actually you want smaller customers. I've heard some other people talk about this, like someone who they built and sold what was it, like a storage unit company. And it's better for them to have smaller customers because you have more customers. There's less variability as opposed to having big customers where if one of them fires you, your revenue can drop by like 20%. That is a legitimate concern with big customers. But at the same time, typically in my experience, there's a lot of really big benefits to having the big customers. Typically the better companies that are more well-run and with more reasonable people are the bigger customers. And there's a reason why they've been around a while, and there's a reason why they're successful, because they're reasonable and understanding, and they're not going to try to ding you on dumb things that you tell them are dumb. I can't tell you how many small customers I try to make a deal for, and they hire me to be their expert, and I tell them certain things, and they keep kind of it's not so much disagreeing, but they keep getting into this article that they read about this random thing and this random thought they had about SEO and these other checks. And some of that is okay, but to a point to where it's like they're just kind of they're more work to take care of a lot of times. Have you had this experience as well? Like some of the smaller clients are actually end up being more work.
Yeah. I kind of moved a few years ago to not be as in the middle of kind of operations and client, like ongoing client relationships. And so it's on my radar, like as like something that, but I don't have to experience, like the experience I have firsthand is with the guy that's running it and is talking with the clients. And so I'm quite familiar with the issue, but it also doesn't feel the same way to me because I'm out of it. And I
Sure.
think there's benefits and drawbacks to that as well. But the again, I think there's kind of just some nuances, and I that's one of the things I love about this kind of format, because we can kind of flesh out, some of these nuances. One of the companies that I'm involved with now is set up to be really on the low end, but on something that's just not, like it's almost off the radar compared to what SEO is, which is like building and hosting websites. So, if times get tight for a smaller business, they may downgrade the pay-per-click that they're doing. They may get rid of SEO. They may go look for somebody else to do SEO. But we're kind of in a really niche market with building and hosting these websites. Businesses, if they're going to stay open, are not turning their websites off. And especially moving forward now after, kind of the pandemic and everything else, I mean, even more online attention.
Yeah. And that's a very standardized
lower dollar
service
amount
you're providing. So it's not customized like the $100,000 deal was.
It's a product.
So having a
And
lot of little
this
customers is actually
goes
good there.
Yeah. And so I'm kind of in that, but I've also kind of been on the other side, which I think is a little more like the consulting, right? You need to come in, you need to understand the nature of the problem. Each problem's a little different. There are principles you can apply to it, but it just takes, it takes some work, it takes some physical, some time, I think some thought to get those going. But I have a feeling that had I continued to explore and look for more deals like that, that closing deals like that wouldn't be any harder than a $400 a month deal or a $1,500 a month deal. I think and that's where I'm kind of like, building the aptitude and building the skill set and the experience base to be able to do whatever you're doing fairly well. There's a lot more to that than I think it seems like. There's I don't think that there's necessarily to close a $100,000 deal. I don't necessarily think you need to be a better salesperson, but I think you need to understand your product, your systems, and maybe the sales cycle differently.
And the customer.
The whole picture. I think you just probably need to understand more about it. Your skills and communication may not need to really, level up that. It's kind of hard to draw that distinction, but hopefully that pointed someplace.
So in short, I would say if you want bigger deals, I think that's generally correct. And it doesn't necessarily cost you that much more. And definitely, I would say that the cost benefit analysis weighs heavily from an SEO client standpoint towards bigger deals. Up to a point. I don't really like super big companies personally, just for some of the reasons that Fletch mentioned, other reasons. There's another interesting point here in terms of Fletch has a 15-year-old daughter, and I was asking him, so I think you're training her. He's nodding his head. You're training her on kind of your business, or she's interested in it. So, and I think this is a really good. Where would you start? I'm going to mute my phone. Where would you start in terms of getting her up to speed to where she can actually do this?
Yeah, so that was it. I'm glad David brought this up. We were chatting before we went live here, and he brought that up. I was like, you know what? That's a really good way to explore this, right? And so I've got 3 daughters. The 15-year-old is actually very, very interested in one of the things I do. I say kind of professionally, kind of what drives all of my professional work, which is understanding how the mind works, and that's kind of it's been really nice to explore that and get more into it. And then as I talk to her and we have conversations about, she's like, okay, so if you're interested in that, then what are you doing? Like, how does that fit for you to do SEO? And I'm like, well, this is now really, she's asking really good questions, because one of the reasons I do SEO, maybe the primary reason that I'm in it and I'm not intending to go elsewhere, is that it has the largest leverage for me right now on affecting how things go, right? It's a way for me to not only multiply myself online, but also kind of gain the vote of confidence from a massive company, Google, which is looked at as very intelligent. And so anyway, so that setting the stage, that actually being one of the first things that I would talk to about Matean. I already have, right? So so the first thing I'm doing is helping her understand how important search engine optimization, ranking on Google is. And coming from a place where, bridging that from wherever she is to beginning to see, oh, wow, this has a really big potential impact, right? And so if you're looking at that from a position of going through training and you're looking at doing a value video and exploring the keyword traffic value for a keyword, this is starting to build out and flesh that out. And then beyond that, getting into, okay, well, what makes one site rank and another one not rank? There are a lot of people who are completely oblivious. They've never really asked that question. They just assume that Google has some kind of knowledge that this company is better, this product is better. And I'm not being in any way demeaning. Like I wouldn't have known until I got into this, and just, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, it's on the top of Google, it's the best one. I typed in best electric razor and it's the number one there. So it's the best. And starting to show that, okay, well, this is how Google has to, and then it's like, once you see it, it's like, oh yeah, of course it has to be this type of thing. That's also very important as you get into this and you're starting to sell deals, helping your client see that this isn't some magic voodoo, that this is really something that can be engineered, but it takes work to get them from wherever they are to wherever they want to be. And so kind of going through that process very much mirrors what I do during kind of our marketing and sales approach to doing clients. So, I think to just put it in a kind of a short thing, the first thing that I would do for someone like my daughter is to help them get really, really good at understanding what makes websites rank, what makes web pages rank on the
at a high level. How are you doing that? What's your plan?
Well, so I backed into this from a position of training people how to do SEO. And so I've got a lot of videos, but most of what I have talked with her, and also my 6-year-old is getting, she's actually even more involved with doing things online than my 15-year-old. That can be an interesting discussion, maybe for today, but maybe for a different day as well. The first thing, so the way I'm approaching this is trying to help her see things that she wouldn't have otherwise seen. I look at me as a father, as a mentor, as a whatever. I need to help people see things that are very important that they may not have otherwise noticed. Okay. And so in so doing, if I've done a good job and she's in a position to say, wow, this is a really potentially impactful, important thing, her mind and curiosity will take her. That's then. So
are you giving her websites to analyze?
I've certainly shown, websites. I'm not, this is not a job for her right now.
Right. Okay. You're just kind of starting the process.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that these kind of two kind of skills building, your capability of fulfillment and your communication, sort of like
that's what I started with, right? And then you ask the question when we're live and I go off on a completely different tangent.
No, it's fine. Because the context matters. And then
because I took a step back behind all of that to say, okay, if I can get her interested, now now what's it about? Now it's about building the technical skills and the ability to communicate it. Right.
Yeah, which is sort of like your ability to service and then your ability to sell, communication. Because for me, so when I first got started, when I first started actually being able to sell deals, it wasn't like I was this badass salesperson who had a lot of experience selling. Really, actually, I'd been spending the last 6 months, prior to that, really focusing on building my skills in terms of capability of fulfillment. And then all I did was I started to do a process where I just kind of talked about SEO with regards to someone's specific website for 10 or 15 minutes. And then I asked for money because it was that like kind of that simple. And so, but it was a very effective way of communicating.
And it works a lot of times, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Because it was all about them. And so that's what I try to do. It was like all about their specific situation. And I'm telling them things that they don't really know. I'm showing them data that they haven't seen. That's all about, it's not just general data. It's not just, hey, you can make a bunch of money with SEO. It's like, this is what's happening to your website, or this is what your competitors are doing, which every business owner is going to be interested in.
Yeah.
And so these things are very engaging. I mean, some of them, I closed a really big deal a long time ago with a 45-minute sales video. And they watched it that day. And this is like not somebody who's not, this is a plastic surgeon. So it's not like he had like nothing else to do. And he watched it within 24 hours because it's very interesting, all about their business. So, building your communication, it's not that I didn't work on my sales skills. It's just that I think it does start with trying to be able to be good at SEO or whatever service you're providing. Because this also helps with your sales. Because if you haven't actually done any SEO and you go to try to sell it, and you're actually the one that's going to fulfill it, it makes it, I think there's something in your voice, something in the way you sell where it's not as effective because you kind of deep down know you might not be able to service them. And now SEO, there is some unknown, but having some experience, having some wins under your belt is going to be really, really helpful to building those skills that you really need to be able to build a business off of this, because I don't think you want to sell to somebody. There's some caveats to this. If you're just starting out, some of the early companies that I did sign, I signed at very low levels, but I was also like, hey, I'm new. Like I let them know. I was very open with them and they accepted that. And that was part of the deal. It's extra risk for them, but it's much lower cost.
Yeah.
And so ultimately getting those big deals didn't come down to this process. Like it wasn't like all of a sudden I was doing things differently. That same process that when I first started making smaller deals, that's still the same process for a lot of my business that I still use, and it still works, and it works at higher levels.
Yeah. When I started doing this, David, I didn't have deals put together. I went and worked hourly. I made $11 an hour. Doing on-site SEO optimization, on-site SEO upgrades to 2 large websites, and just cranking away. But that got me really comfortable with the WordPress software. It got me, I was paying attention to the ranking because they already had the ranking software set up and all this and that. And so I started kind of noticing things. I started kind of fleshing out my understanding of not just like the things that we do that we've been taught to do, right? But maybe some other kind of nuances that I could put in there and how those affected, on page and what was valuable to the client. Like they said, I want this, and this done. Right. And there was some deal like on, was it Upwork or something, like one of these big outsourcing websites. So there was somebody that posted a gig and all of he said he was willing to pay like, $4 an hour. So they're looking at somebody in, the Philippines or India or whatever. And I was like, hey man, I can't do this job for that price, but the way you've posted it, you're going to have some stuff done to your website just because of what you're telling people that you want done that may wind up hurting you. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And then they came back to me and said, okay, so how much do you want per hour to do this work? Because you're the only person who actually gave me value. Like you talked about, I sat down and I was trying to help them understand something about their business. And I went into it like hoping that would happen, right? But at the same time, if it didn't, they were better off no matter what. And so I think that helped kind of set the stage for the way I then approached when a client would contact me. I gave them information specific to their business about their industry, their market, their competition, and what I could do to help them, win more deals and get more attention.
Yeah, and you brought up something that I plan on talking about, which is kind of positioning. and not in like a negative way. There's can be, I think, a little bit of negative connotation,
Hmm.
but you positioned yourself. And I think this is actually, I've heard of this, of a strategy very similar to this on Upwork, where it's actually, you don't want to be the lowest. You try to make the highest, but you convince the person that all these low things are worthless, and or even negative. And I think that's kind of what you did. You convinced them, like, look, I'm the person that actually can help you here. These other people can't help you. And I think that it comes down to kind of being trusted, and also, giving value is very helpful, right out of the gate. There, not that you give value endlessly, but giving them something that makes them go, oh, actually, that's helpful. And it sets up a relationship in a way to where you're kind of ahead of the game. For them, they're maybe playing with a little bit of house money. And so it kind of, I think there's an internal kind of risk calculation that goes a little bit more towards you, but also it shows that you are an expert, that it just gives them a data point for, what you're talking about.
Yeah, it lets you demonstrate some aptitude,
Mm-hmm.
be proactive on something, being helpful.
Yeah.
Like there's a reciprocity thing that kind of comes in. Like there's a
Yep.
whole bunch of things that I look back at it now. It's like, oh yeah, I did that perfectly. I
Ah,
just did it. It wasn't as engineered as it might look. Me looking
yeah.
back at retroactive, yeah, in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes a long way. Just being. And here's the thing. I was doing that. I needed to get money. I was broke, right? I needed income, but I needed to build my skills. Like
Yes.
you spoke about. I had some confidence that had been transferred from good training that I got, but I didn't have it based on the work I had done. I needed to do that work and have my confidence move kind of lockstep a little bit with my competence. And so I needed to
Yeah.
develop more competence.
So
And
a
yeah,
lesson directly about that would be not expecting yourself to get big deals like right out of the gate. Well, it is possible.
Mhm.
I had some very low end deals the first times I was doing it, but it's kind of like being paid for experience, not just the service experience of doing SEO,
Yeah.
but the experience of the relationship and customers.
Yeah.
So I
And
wouldn't.
some of the lower end deals, like um, they can be a problem, but like one of our, I say best SEO clients, just because I know what we do to manage the work we do, $300 a month. And we've made a lot of money over a 3-year relationship, and they are not a problem at all. And they have
Yeah,
good results, and
I
we
have
or have a good margin, so.
I have a client who's been paying me for over 7 years, on auto pay, at a level that I would not, 750 a month. I would never offer it anymore. But
Yeah.
they've been around for so long, and they've been paying me for 7 years on auto pay.
Yeah.
You do the math, and so it's
And if the
not.
deal works for both parties, it works,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So vision and justification, we did do a whole podcast on this, so I recommend
Yeah.
you check that out. That's really, really helpful, because it's going to be important that you understand, depending on how things are going, that they get the vision that they have, and then now you just got to justify it. So they get the vision that SEO can grow their business. One way of doing this that I do it is, if I can find other competitors that Ahrefs will show a very high traffic value, that's really good. That tends to correlate with a good deal. Like if Ahrefs shows that one of their competitors, direct competitors, is making 50,000 a month, then it becomes a lot easier to ask them for 5,000 a month to do SEO. And there's other ways to estimate traffic. I've done kind of just like a Excel spreadsheet traffic calculator as well. I think this is actually very useful. Again, you want to be able to show them, this is the vision, this is what you can make. Now justify it by kind of this last major bullet, which is I would consider kind of positioning. And how do they view you? And it's not so much view, but kind of feel about you, your brand, and your SEO. Some of this is kind of more internal, and maybe they can't directly identify it. And there's kind of two major areas of positioning that need to be treated pretty differently, at least in the initial communications, inbound versus outbound. So inbound would be like Dallas SEO Geek ranks for Dallas SEO. They click and they find me ranking and they contact me. That's very different than reaching out to a company and calling them and saying, hey, did you know that SEO can help you? There's a couple big advantages to inbound and some big advantages to outbound as well. With inbound, searching for SEO, at least in this specific case. So they're already convinced that SEO at least can potentially help their business. And also they found me ranking. This is actually a unique thing to SEO. They found me ranking, considering when people have been like, I kind of want to hire the guy who was actually ranking. And that's very helpful. It's one objective case that they can demonstrate to you. What do you think about inbound versus outbound, Fletch? In terms of you positioning?
I think yes about it.
Yes. All right. Well, moving on.
No, what you mentioned at the kind of the end of what you were saying there about, kind of the proof being in the pudding about ranking. Many deals I had. And the reason they listed was because you're ranking number one for a term that I needed. And that's the thing I needed, right? Your ability to rank is why I chose you. I'm not really looking at somebody in position two because they couldn't beat you. And so I want this to be effective and work. And so in that way, like I'm looking at them like, dude, it takes a lot of work to get to number two as well.
Yeah.
Like, it takes a lot of work to get to number, like, if you're top five, you're probably doing some things right.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people don't necessarily know that or put that together. And so there's times when it's like, hey, with SEO, you're number one or you're not. And the amount of traffic, like I've talked about traffic in certain ways as well. It's, if there's one searcher, that doesn't mean that only one website gets that traffic, right? If you're kind of near the top of the search engines, you're going to have a shot, right? If I'm looking for a roofing contractor, I'm not just going to click on the first one, talk to them, and never ask anyone else for bids.
Yeah.
You're probably, and so, this little conversation, when I start helping people understand that, they're like, well, you actually you told me that I should maybe go talk to the person that's number two, kind of. And I said, yeah, sure. I'd love for you to talk to them. I can help you understand things much more distinctly than they can. I know who they are and how they approach things, but I'm also setting the stage for them to start getting really happy when they start getting up to number 5, number 4 on page 1, and not necessarily having to get to number 1 or else we failed the whole project. Right. And so this is where I kind of am coming at from being like, and I'll get back to the inbound versus outbound because it kind of connects right here. I do this a lot, I know, so bear with me. But
we both need it, both me and you.
So the crossover then that I have for them is I begin asking them, what are you doing to bring more customers in? And if they are doing a lot of outbound, I can say, okay, so then why are you looking at SEO, right? Why are you looking at getting more traffic from Google? If you're doing outbound, it's like, well, we're not having much success with it, or we're killing it and we want more, or, in a certain way, I can start asking them how, like, what about this is like helping kind of sell them. Right. I want to understand what it's going to take for me to help them see, for them to say yes. Now, the reason I started with that is because that's a lot of what I needed to have to be able to start doing outbound, because I began to understand how many of the people who were out there looking for an SEO agency were looking at things, whether they were doing outbound or inbound, how they just kind of approached business, because none of these things were things that I had done previous to getting online. All of, I say marketing, I didn't do any marketing previous to this. I had consulting businesses and relationships, and there were some referrals involved, but I didn't really have anything going on. Yeah. And so I kind of needed to flesh this out. And so it was really helpful for me to be able to do that. I was a little afraid of getting on the phone. I didn't necessarily want to do that. I didn't think it was a strength of mine. And so being able to talk to people who had kind of raised their hand already and approached me, let me build a lot more understanding, so that then when I would just call somebody, I had a lot better
you talked to a lot more business owners. You felt them out in a way that was a little bit lower pressure. Yeah. And so outbound has its benefits as well. It's much more controllable. I think it's, you can scale a lot, like to massive numbers a lot faster. There's these companies.
You can just turn it on and off like that. That's something I wanted to make sure that that didn't get lost in there.
Yeah, you can turn it on and off. It is a bit more work because you have to convince them that SEO can grow their business, but that's possible. You have to convince them that you can do you're competent enough to service the SEO, which, you know, and sometimes with inbound, you're closer to that than you're not. But there's this, the example, I can't remember, I think it's Reach Local. It's a company. There's several companies like this where they grow from nothing to like $100 million companies in 3 to 5 years. Basically, they sell crappy services, but they have these, basically their company is massive sales teams, these massive outbound sales teams, and they have a system, they have a process they know works to a profitable degree, and then they just pour money on it. The more money they pour on it, the faster they grow. And that is one of the benefits of outbound. And I actually think that inbound and outbound work really well together, because when you're part of Google's algorithm is traffic. And so if you're taking outbound people and you're sending them to your website, that can actually help you rank. And you can also use that inbound, you can cookie people and use Facebook ads to kind of do sort of what's a combination of inbound and outbound, and do highly targeted, very inexpensive ads. And so I do think that these kind of build on each other. And I think that ultimately kind of the best model has a combination of the two. But I do know that there's lots of people who are very successful just doing one or the other. The point though about this is that be aware of which one you're doing, and that the way that you go about doing that, it requires a different approach in terms of, not in terms of the objectives that you need to meet, but in terms of the way that you meet the objectives, or where you already are in those objectives in terms of brand positioning, personal positioning, and SEO positioning.
Yeah. So I actually looked at it. We've talked, I think, on one of the, I don't know if it was on the podcast or if it was like, you know, kind of the outtake reel, but like I look at this strategically, right? So say you've got 4 hours that you're able to allocate toward whatever task it might be. And now you're thinking about inbound or outbound, right? What are you going to do? Like in one way of looking at this, those 4 hours can be spent doing something, whether it's picking up the phone or building content on the web. I look at, they're not as different as they might seem, right? If you're making a phone call and you never get all the way to the decision maker, you haven't really done as much. Like that isn't that different than building a piece of content on the web that someone might wind up finding. Like that decision maker may wind up finding the message you had to leave with the receptionist, but you don't know. Doing what is necessary to connect all the way with the decision maker, there are less differences between outbound and inbound, I think, than people realize. Strategically speaking, understanding SEO is understanding how to get all the way to the decision maker when they decide they want something. Now, how did they decide that? Well, maybe they heard your radio ad, right? Maybe they got a piece of direct mail and then went and Googled it and found your thing. Like, I don't see these as completely distinct from one another. I think there's quite a little bit in common that we don't really consider because it's phrased as outbound and inbound, and out and in are opposites, right? But there's a great deal of benefits to fleshing this out more and understanding more about it, because at the end of the day, you have to decide what you're going to do, and whether you have the aptitude and the skill set and the framework and the ability to pick up the phone and get all the way to the decision maker and get them to start thinking about your solution is your time that you can invest toward doing that better spent than toward building content and getting it ranked on the website. Right. And that comes down to your skill set and your understanding on it both. Yeah.
And even if you aren't able to ultimately get in touch with that outbound person you're trying to contact, you're actually gaining experience and getting better at it. And you're also building.
You can build understanding the whole time, whether you're doing, cold calls, whether you're sending. Here's another outbound. Okay, talk about emails, right? What's radio advertising? Well, it's outbound, I guess. You're talking to somebody.
Outbound.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. It's like we have to classify these. What is it all though? It's you helping people understand that you have a solution to a problem that they either know they already have or they don't know they already have. Your job is to help them realize that they have it.
And I think that there's kind of 3 perspectives that you could look at, and I'm calling it positioning, and that implies a certain amount of not so much convincing them in the moment that, hey, I'm a good guy, hey, SEO is great for you, but the kind of setting up a framework around you to where that some of that is taken care of for you. So brand positioning would also be like, do you actually have a website? What's on that website? How's that website look? Is it a thin website, or does it look kind of like a full website? That's part of brand positioning. Also actually ranking your website. That's part of brand positioning. Personal positioning, kind of the way you talk to them matters. And then SEO positioning, again, making sure to talk about SEO in a way that makes them realize what it can really do for them. I think these are kind of if you're not able to make sales, it's probably one of these three things. And if you do these three things really well and you convince them that you have a good brand, you're a good person, and SEO can really help them, then I think that is going to, you have a very high chance of making a sale there.
Yeah, the kind of the positioning thing. There was we ran a live event a few years ago, and we had Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, right?
Yeah, this is very much like
as our as our MC, and then afterwards we got to all have dinner together, right? Kind of the principals of the company and him, and it was really neat to kind of be in like kind of really close, kind of private, close proximity with somebody who you've heard.
Who they made a movie about.
They made a movie about, DiCaprio. It wasn't DiCaprio, it was the actual Wolf of Wall Street. So, so there's, anyway, what I'm getting at is we kind of, sometimes when we see the personification of someone online who's got like a thing, like a certain thing that they train, and Belfort, Jordan has, like, he's like, enthusiastic as hell, sharp as a tack. And I think there was something about, there are like three things, and you're talking about kind of positioning in a way that if you're doing outbound, or I say outbound, like here's one of the reasons why I say that outbound, inbound are not quite as, and this talks about positioning, but like if I'm doing a video and it's me doing this sort of thing, in a certain way, I'm representing not only myself, but then the company behind me, my knowledge that's in my head, all that kind of thing. I'm the representation of that. So when I'm looking at positioning that, whether I'm wearing a t-shirt, whether I'm wearing a nice shirt, whether it looks like I'm in a fancy office, whether it looks like I'm in a dark, dank garage, are things that are going to help me occupy certain space in people's minds who see that. And so if, when we talk about positioning, it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to position myself here so people can, but what we're really doing is occupying and triggering certain things in people's minds. If they need to see somebody that's in a suit, or I'm not even going to listen to, I'm not going to hit the playhead unless this guy's in a suit, because those are the only, this is all your thing. And all lawyers I know, business lawyers, wear suits. With SEO, it's kind of like, oh man, if you're like in some deep, dark underground cave with a bunch of technology around you, you kind of maybe look like you fit the part of somebody that's got something that's unique from everybody else, right? So I guess kind of circling back around to looking at this strategically, when you're looking at positioning, how much is it going to take to achieve or accomplish certain results that you might not achieve if you don't go to these levels? So like these conversations we're having, there's not a ton of production value. We don't have big fancy intro, big fancy outro. We've both got some decent stuff looking behind us. You got the monkey. I'm the monkey on this side.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but the thing is, if we had terrible audio, nobody would listen, right? We've been talking about kind of just having the background, right? It changes. There's something to engage with and look at. But we don't have to be really super fancy. We don't have to look like we're in a big, massive, nice studio to be able to talk about these sorts of things from this position. If we were doing this for the express purpose of getting contracts with Fortune 500 companies to do SEO consulting for them, we would need to consider our positioning a little bit differently, and how we're, I say physically, but visually represented when we're doing this sort of thing, I think. And so when you're looking at doing your marketing, whether it's outbound or inbound, or however you want to kind of start to look at that, it's something to consider, right? It's something to be aware of, that if you've got a nice shirt on and your hair looks combed, that might be a good thing. It might also kind of, yeah, I'm the opposite. I usually have a backwards ball cap on, and I don't know the last time I combed my hair. Just kind of kind of works. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that positioning a lot of times is not something that you explicitly say.
Yes.
It's how things look around you.
Yep.
Being confident, coming across confident, points to this is a person with a lot of competence.
Mm-hmm.
That's the context. That's the positioning. Being able to listen and not have to talk over somebody. Oh, this is somebody who's really in control of the situation because he doesn't have to talk over somebody, right? And these are little things. They're huge, but they might not be noticed if we're saying, oh, positioning. I need to position myself as the best SEO in Phoenix.
Well, that has its whole own issues. As we talked about, we don't like the word, at least I don't like the word best. It's not very useful in most cases.
Right. It means, well,
but
I
mean, I think you brought up a good point. It's like the positioning isn't just about, I think you said something about, it's not just about what you say. It's also kind of the content.
Yeah, it's not just explicitly what you say.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the point that I'm trying to make here. There's signals that you can send, and you need to send them, whether it be inbound or outbound. And this is kind of inspired, or at least as I was writing it, I was realizing it is a lot like what Jordan Belfort does. He has something called straight line selling. I think he still sells it, so you can go find it. I
just pulled it up when we were talking. It's for sale, it looks like.
Yeah. And he has like a 10-10-10, and the 10-10-10 is basically getting a person to someone says yes when you get them to a 10 in terms of their confidence level or their understanding or agreement that you are competent at you personally, your company, and I think the third thing is your like basically whatever SEO is, like
the company and the product.
The product. Yeah. And
service,
so that's almost exactly what I've got here. I'm phrasing it a little bit differently and looking at it from a different angle, but at the same time, I think it's still pretty well valid. You got to convince them of these things. It's not always 100% true, I think, because sometimes it's like within the context of fitting certain thresholds compared to other companies. Like some companies want a smaller business and some companies want a big business. Some companies provide a certain set of services that are unique that other people don't provide, and so they meet that threshold. And then you don't have to be a 10-10-10. You just have to meet certain thresholds. But considering this is going to be huge to any substantial sale that you make. So that's why I brought up here. So
I like it.
And I think that the way I kind of stumbled into, I think I did some things right, but I also kind of stumbled into setting my business up to where a lot of these things were taken care of for me pretty well. I think I got like a brand that made sense for me, that I could be congruent with. That's a really critical factor.
You've talked about that on some of these other, like the Dallas SEO Geek. You didn't surprise someone when you started talking to them after they found your website. Like it wasn't like, oh, you're just some like hillbilly or something like that. You're kind of like a technology, and you're really into it. You understood it. Very technical.
Well, it fit me really well, and it made it easy to be congruent. And so
you don't want to be the word. Yep.
The worst thing you can do is wear a tie and a suit one day and then wear t-shirt and shorts the next day, because then they'd have no idea. There's so much uncertainty there. So being congruent, I'm presenting myself as a geek, and I stayed consistent throughout. And I presented myself as live or die by who you are or how you want to be perceived, and accept that some people are not going to want that. And hopefully some people are, and don't try to chase after the people that aren't going to want it. Don't try to position yourself to where, well, I'm a big company, but I'm also a small, nimble, guy who can help you, give you customized, personalized service. Pick one and stick with it. And that's part of kind of the brand positioning. And I feel like I kind of stumbled into that to where a lot of this was I set up a scenario where a lot of this was taken care of for me pretty well. My brand was me, which kind of is a shortcut, but long-term it has some issues. And then SEO, by the ranking for Dallas SEO, it enabled me to be like, okay, they already kind of have they're at least interested in SEO. It's not a 0. It's maybe not a 10, but it's not a 0.
One of the things you said, I want to just draw some more attention to, like you said, wear a suit one day and then shorts the next day. One of the reasons that's so important is that, we hear a lot, people need to see or hear your marketing messages 6-7 times before they, will say yes, or spend some time fleshing out and investigating whether or not they are going to work with you or need to work with you or want to work with you. And if you come across very differently in each of those potential messages they hear, you're having to occupy even more space in their mind in a way that you're going to have to spend even more resources to kind of start to gain a foothold on, oh yeah, that's the really technical Dallas SEO geek who probably has an answer to this question, as opposed to he's got this really technical thing here and he's doing this lifestyle representation of the, really nice car and big fancy house over here. And he's doing this kind of like the way I kind of position myself, if anything, is a lot more of kind of mechanic, where like engineering in such a way is like related to cars. Like I can lift the hood and look at the engine and figure out what's wrong and fix it. And I have hands-on, right? So if I'm positioning myself as a hands-on mechanic type person and somebody asks me about meta titles and I don't know what in the world that is, okay, congruence just went out the door.
Yeah. Well, they don't trust you anymore.
Yeah.
And they don't feel like they know you, and people aren't going to buy from brands or people that they don't feel like they at least know a little bit, meet certain thresholds.
Or trust, or they either think you're misrepresenting yourself or they've made a mistake in assuming that they understood you in the first place. Both of which are bad for, sales and marketing.
Okay.
From my impression.
Yeah. I have an urgent thing from my wife. So,
all right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up. We've covered a lot of ground today anyway. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for listening, and I hope to hear about you on the next podcast. Have a great day.
See you guys.
Bye.